So I think I've gone a bit off the deep end with difference, but it's like a new toy to me. I've suddenly seen it, so I'm looking for difference everywhere, and sameness. And it's it's just appealing, but it's also the spice of life, they say, isn't it? And so here we are. We all vary with our assumptions about life, our characteristics, values, hierarchy, model of mind, preferences, slants, opinions, frameworks, political views, whatever it is. We're all unique in those respects. Curious then, isn't it, that in intimate relationships we often try to make the other in our image. I understand why. It narrows the gap, narrows the distance, and of course wherever there's distance there's anxiety. It's I don't know, it's a strange thing. I remember back in my youth, a girlfriend back then wanted to get a tattoo, and it was unusual back then for it just started to come in back then. Now everybody seems having, so, but it was upsetting to my mind, of course, her body, her decision, and I had to question myself at the time, why do I feel anxious about this? What, she asked me what I thought of it, and I thought, well, this is a strange predicament, because her body, her mind, she does what she wants with her body. Who am I to say, why am I being invited to give opinion? But I must confess, there was a small tinge at the back of my mind that, this girl's independent. Yes. Too different, it's a bit of a strain. Too different, they start wandering off looking for other things to do. And then you kind of are faced with this dilemma. Do you bridge the gap or do you go your own way? And looking to the generation before mine, I've heard this expressed in slightly different ways. Parents that work apart from each other, and then when they retire and then they spend every night in the same bed, they realise that actually working away from each other was how it worked, and this is just intolerable now. And but you're at that age, 60, 65. Yeah, tricky stuff. And this, I think, is the wonder of these tools of communication. Bridging these gaps, reaching people, communicating with them, or at least reconciling some workable solution. And if you were wondering how the story ended, of course I was young, dumb, full of cum, inflexible, and I refused to change my ways. So you draw your own conclusions as to how that ended. And of course, life isn't without its contradictions. If we do succeed in closing that gap and then having them conform to our very wishes, and we install the same values and beliefs in them as they are in us, they become boring, bland and uninteresting, and then we start looking elsewhere for change and difference. So, I wonder where the sweet spot is. If someone can let me know where the sweet spot is, I can't find the sweet spot. Of course, there's still the shitty, abusive relationships. They still exist. They never seem to go out of fashion. And these relationships seem to extend across all scale. Interpersonal, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, corporations, structures, countries. Yeah. And they all, for them to work anyway, there has to be a presumption of value in the relationship, otherwise you wouldn't do it. It's a lot of work. And that work is the commitment and willingness to step outside of one's limited frame. And as we've spoken about in the previous audios, first position, second and third position, and then, a final third position. And there is even a fourth position that I haven't explicitly defined. And in other audios, I've mentioned the Myers-Briggs types, which is, I just started to get a handle on it. I mean, I was aware of these years and years ago. In one of the first companies I was director of, we used the wealth dynamics, which I think is based on the Myers-Briggs. We got all new intakes to undertake the test so that we could see where they are. Cost a frigging fortune as well. But worth it. And so, yeah, I mean, today, I don't know what we've got. And there's Ocean, there's Disc, there's Strength Finder, Myers-Briggs. Yeah, it's all good. But it makes explicit the type and the cognitive function or preference or, style of being, I suppose. And then as I've said before, I don't hold too much stock in it. I don't think the science really supports it, but I think it's a useful thing, only in the respect of being aware that other people function differently to you, and then there is space for an investigation to understand how that other person sees the world and how that other person processes the world, and to know it's not the same as the way you do it. So whatever label we want to put on them, I mean, does it really matter if they're ESTP, INTJ, or ESFJ? If you can even remember all those combinations and the associated cognitive stacks, great. But if you can't, it's just a little bit more work to go, new person, I wonder how they function according to their cognitive preferences and how they perceive and make decisions. Let me go and find out. Let me ask them a few questions. Let me observe their style. And then I can interact with that style in their preferred way, the way that they're going to receive it better. It just cuts down friction, saves time. Of course, in the business setting, we can place them in a role that's kind of commensurate to that style, which just about sums up the process. Understanding another's perspective, appreciating the differences, and then working to collaboration. So one expression that goes around the kind of online guru movement, fake gurus, Jesus Christ, is no one cares. And I think that's a mistake, or even maybe it's not, maybe it's a cold observation. I hear it from the kind of right-wingers and all the people are on about, but my free speech absolutism, and what they mean is they want to say things and get away with it consequence-free. And then when you criticise them, they want to shut down your criticism, and then all of a sudden they're not about the free peaches. But we ought to care, or at least have the time to care. Even if it's to the extent of saying something like, I recognise you're in need. I wonder if there's someone else or some other way of getting your needs met that doesn't involve me. At least it stings, it's horrible, but it's preferable to just saying, oh, grow up you snowflake, no one cares. Which just turns the whole world shitty, because then people do stop caring. At least with the former, there was an inference that there might be somebody out there who not only cares, but is actually in a position to help. I care, but I can't help. It's better than saying, fuck off, no one cares, grow a pair. Suck it up, buttercup. So just to review the toys in the box, we've got this notion of active listening, where we can use open questions to start the conversation, get it rolling. Ask them a question about something which you feel they're ambivalent about. On the one hand, they want to do, but on the other hand, they don't want to do, or they're in some kind of conflict. Ask them an open question to get that ball rolling, and then start slowly, ease in. You've opened up probably a sensitive subject, and the person's still trying to figure out if you're friend or foe, whether you're leading them up the garden path to embarrass them or drop them in it, or whether you're careless with their feelings, or whether you're inept at solving this problem. So they're not going to reveal it all at once. They're going to make you work for it. So simple reflection, just pace a little bit. Another tool is to use an analogy, so it's a slightly more complicated, not complicated, but involved or complex or nuanced way of reflecting back their meaning. So you kind of map across meaning to a different situation and perhaps base it around something that's core to their life. And then there's complex reflection, simple reflection. Take it in turns. Simple reflection, complex reflection, maybe a question. Ratio of about 3 reflections to 1 question. No roadblocks. What are the roadblocks? Ordering, warning, moralizing, advising, using logic, criticizing, praising, labeling, analyzing, reassuring, questioning, and avoiding. So, I think that. Turn that one off. You ought to turn that one off. If you don't, then turn that one off. What I would do, turn that one off, that's no real use. Here's where you're wrong. The facts are, no, don't do that. You're not thinking clearly. No, don't do that one either. Appeasing them, I couldn't agree more. No, maybe not, leave it out. Sarcasm, leave that one out. Don't interpret or analyse or diagnose or evaluate. Stay away from judgments. Don't sympathise. Don't console. Don't cross-examine or interrogate. When they're telling the story, don't question their motives as to action. Let them tell the story kind of as they tell it. So you might encourage, like, you know, how did that make you feel? Or you might do a reflection, repeat back their last statement, and then what did you say? Because that kind of questions their actions, and there's an inference in there of blame or shortcoming, or is this what you did? Because if they say, oh no, I didn't do that, and then where do you go from there now? Because they're thinking they're at fault or at error. So even that's a veiled criticism. And don't do the diversion or avoiding, you know, you think you've got your problems, wait till you hear about mine. Yeah, don't do that. So that's the Roadblocks revisited. So at this stage, we're not problem solving. We're just, I don't know whether it's leading to motivational interviewing. I think that's where it's leading. We'll come on to choice talk and status quo talk later, but this is just to get them to think about their perceptions and their decisions, but in a roundabout kind of way. You're leading without leading, but you're not leading to a conclusion. You're just leading them to write the next line of their life. You might even write a line for them and then let them carry it on, like we talked with the exotic corpse method. That's really what we're doing. We're helping them build a narrative, a story, but hopefully one that's close to their kind of morals and ethics and value judgments, that's somewhere close to a sensible perception that then enables a decision. It seems to me as well, life isn't just about the what, it's also about the why and the how. You know, I've said it before, it seems that we all have more or less the same basic needs. Alright, you know, Maslow's hierarchy, I think there's a few more on that list that, you know, really juice it up for being human beings. Regardless, they are common across most humans. And it also seems to me that it's important to people that not only that they meet that need, but they do it in a way that brings a particular satisfaction. So some people want to be rich, but they absolutely would feel awful and wretched and such a faker if they won money by the lottery. It just wouldn't be acceptable to them. Yeah, they've got to do it. They've got to earn it. They've got to feel that's their endeavour in life. And if you just provide a lottery win, you've taken away their endeavour. Maybe it's time for a small exercise. P's and D's. This is where you write down what pleases you in your relationship or your business or your job, and your D's, which are those things that displease you or make you unhappy. Of course, I say make you unhappy. I hope we can all agree that these are free choices. We actually choose to be happy or we choose to be unhappy. In that respect, sadness is probably a better metric for this particular exercise, because it seems more emotional based rather than a choice about mental state. So on the basis that happiness and joy, feelings of joy, feelings of things being wonderful, are affirmations that our needs are being met in wonderful ways. So we might care to write down what those are so that we can acknowledge those. So think of times when you experience joy at work, when you experience joy in your relationships, or joy wherever, whatever you're doing, and write down the circumstances that led to those feelings. And then do the same thing for sad. When you're feeling sad at work, it's because when you feel sad in an interpersonal relationship, it's because, and hopefully now the drivers, the needs that are either being met or not being met, will be explicit and revealed, possibly, maybe even for the first time, who knows. And perhaps in this process now, it's, if for those listening who have discovered this for the first time, maybe now it's a pathway to clearer communication, because you explicitly know what some of these needs are and what some of the needs to not have are, or, you know, the D's, the do not do's, the disappointments, the displeasing. And having these two lists now, you can communicate these in clear ways to other people, so you can tell them explicitly your needs, and when they're met, you feel good. And you can say explicitly, you also have a need for these other things not to happen because you feel sad when those happen. And you can articulate that in a way that structures some mechanism, some behaviour, or some rule that needs to be applied or adopted, or some process that needs to be changed so that it makes life more wonderful for you. And maybe it's a useful exercise to do now early on, because over time we, of course, express to people how displeased we are when things go wrong, but the expression of the pleaser starts to get taken for granted because it's started the relationship. It's all about pleasing. It's all about pleasing. And even sometimes when the other person does something, there's a little bit of a wind up, we pretend we're still pleased because it's the honeymoon period. They can do no wrong. And that starts the bad habits. But because we don't express the displeased because we want to revel in the honeymoon period, after a while we feel strange and kind of embarrassed that suddenly we're bringing up these things that always displeased us before. It's just we never said before. And because of that, we feel that we can't say that these things displease us. And of course, because we don't say these things displease us, and we stop saying the other things please us, eventually it'll just be all pent up displeasure and, consequences. Going to get fired from the job, partner's going to leave, one of them's going to get pissed off, and might even reach that road to contempt, and who knows where that leads. So we ought to be aware and practiced and skilled to almost avoid those at significant cost, because the cost of not doing so is also significant. And when I say that, it strikes me again, there's always cost and balance everywhere. If we don't take on the burden of being excellent communicators, then society at large pays for that, and that comes back and bites us in all the ways that it might. So I guess ultimately it's a game of pick your poison. Do you want to pay sooner or pay more later? I suppose the advantage of paying now is you know what you're paying, and it's under your control, whereas contributing to a crappy society where no one cares, because we perpetuate these poor communications and say things like no one cares, just this isolation over which we have very little control, because if anyone we speak to just says no one cares, sort your own fucking shit out. I think we're coming out of that, actually. I see a sense of community returning, and there's definitely a shift in the zeitgeist coming out of the United States, funnily enough. Also, a lot of coffee shops being converted to social meeting places where they make meals, pay what you can, if you can, and board games and all these kinds of things. Yeah, lots of dead retail space in the future, I sees. And at the time of recording, we're just on the brink of this coronavirus thing. So that's going to have a bit of a short-term effect. Must get to that book as well. Disaster Management. I read that a couple of months ago. Fascinating book. Covers a whole lot. Tornadoes, earthquakes, disease outbreak, contagion, fire, floods, and the whole superstructure of emergency response. Fascinating book. Anyway, again, communication, interdepartmental communication, essential, critical. And again, in the United States, it's a level of application that's been removed in the last 3 years. I once worked for a car dealership, and one of the salesmen there told me a story about when he was running a business, and he tried to save costs, and he was at the point of ringing up the window cleaner to say, I don't need you to come and clean my windows anymore because my windows are always clean. Yes, exactly. Anyway, getting back on track, I do ramble. The whole point about all this, we don't automatically know what's in people's heads, and even under interrogation and cross-examination, we're still not going to quite get there. Speaking of cross-examination and interrogation, another fascinating book I read. I'm going to have to do one on interrogations then. It's not what you think. People react more to kindness than fear, because there seems to be a very strong bias towards telling people anything you think they want to hear under fear. Whereas under relaxed conditions, you might not tell the full truth, which could be equally as bad, but you certainly won't misdirect as much. There's a bit more to it. But the process starts with listening. Anyway, so we'll get to that one. So we're in someone else's head, we're listening, we're using reflective feedback to help them write the next paragraph of their story, of their narrative, by which we help them with their perceptions of things, and we help them with their possible outcomes. Their certainly help them to see more options, and by that we give them more choice, and if we're giving them more choice, they have more power. So maybe that's what it's all about. So if you want to think of it, I know we mentioned gap and little jokes about what's left isn't right and what's right isn't left, and that old one as well in accounting that you have assets and liabilities, but if you abbreviate it, on one side you've got ass, and on the other side you've got lies. So which do you want? Do you want ass or do you want lie? Yeah, funny, okay. But this comes back to the P's and D's, the pleasures and the displeasures. Do you want pleasure? Some more ass. Or do you want displeasure? Some more lies. So now, if we've got our list of P's and D's, or pleasures and displeasures, or ass and lies, and we've gone through a process of asking someone else what their pleasures and displeasures are, we can now start asking for things. So this is in the context of interpersonal relationships where, we've gone out of the honeymoon period. We've had a few ups and sets and we've noticed that we're drifting apart and we want to re-engage with the other person so we can start making requests. You might look at it however you want to look at it. You might say, my P to D ratio is not satisfactory. I know there's going to be a certain number of D's that I'm going to have to put up with. I'll put up with a D. So if the number of P's is going down whilst the number of D's is going up, it makes it unpleasant, eventually intolerable. So we have to do something to redress the balance, and this is where we make requests of people. Come on to that in the next audio.